Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Tobago House of Assembly's Post-Executive Council Retreat updates. I'd like to take this time to acknowledge the presence of the Chief Secretary, Honorable Fali Augustine, Secretaries and Assistant Secretaries of the Tobago House of Assembly, and administrators here with us today. I'm Davia Chambers, and it is my pleasure to take you through this afternoon's press conference. This afternoon, we're joined by the Chief Secretary, Honorable Fali Augustine, and the Secretary of Finance, Trade and the Economy, Councillor Petalan Roberts, who will provide updates. Without further ado, I invite the Chief Secretary of the Tobago House of Assembly, Honorable Augustine, to address you.
Good afternoon, Tobago. Good afternoon to those who are looking from beyond the 116 square miles of Tobago. As it is customary, post the budget allocation approved by the Parliament, the Tobago House of Assembly, inclusive of administrators, technical officers, and of course, the secretaries and assistant secretaries, would meet, will assess, will analyze the budgetary allocations, look at the priority areas. This reprioritization activity leads us to a place whereby we determine what we can execute with the resources we have versus what we will have to put on hold. This year, we chose that we will have these meetings all the way in beautiful Castara, north of Tobago. Last year, you will recall that we were in equally beautiful Speyside. And the year before that, we were in the Crown Point area. So we have been going all over the island, and the reason we chose Castara this time around is because we also want to ensure that these become opportunities for which secretaries, assistant secretaries, and administrators can in fact interact with local communities and ensure that what we do here in the boardroom is actually reflective of what the people of Tobago want at all stages and all places. So not just those who are the top echelon of the society, but even those from rural communities such as ours here in beautiful Castara. Over the last 2 days, because we started here very early on Monday morning, all the way late into the evening, we employed the policy of strategic selectivity. That was presented by myself in the budget in June earlier this year. And the concept of strategic selectivity has to do with looking at what resources are available and being very strategic about how we deploy those resources so that we can have maximum benefit for all Tobagonians everywhere. And that also includes Tobagonians who are a part of the diaspora, because we do see you as part of our constituent base. For most of the updates with regards to the decisions made, I'll have the Secretary of Finance present those to you. Let me also remind you that on the 28th of November this year, that's a few weeks from now, or 2 or so weeks from now, we will be going to the House, and the Secretary of Finance will be presenting in very fine detail all of the numbers and figures and the priorities as we looked at them over the last 2 days. But even before we go to the House on the 28th, on the 18th of November, we do have a mixer that we are specially targeting our business community, and in particular our contracting, our community of contractors, so that you have a heads up in terms of what are the project outputs for the upcoming fiscal year. At that mixer on the 18th of November, we will also have the bankers present in the room and all the financial institutions, so that all systems, including the private sector, is ready to go with these projects. And of course, the Division of Finance that is currently going through the finance month, the Division's Finance Month, they have some other activities, including their conference and so on, that's coming up. All of these are opportunities through which the Secretary of Finance will present to the people of Tobago and different sectors on the island what the plans and projections are for fiscal 2025. And so with that, I wish to turn you over to the Secretary of Finance, who will present some information to you. And after that information is presented, we will go immediately into your questions. We do have the secretaries and assistant secretaries present. We do have administrators and technical officers still present in the room. And so there is an opportunity, I would like to believe, that if questions come that require responses from specific divisions, that we can get support for such responses from the secretaries and assistant secretaries in particular who are present here with us in Castara at this conference. So over to you, Secretary Roberts, and then we take it from there.
Thank you very much to Honorable Chief Secretary, and I would just like to say good afternoon to Tobago, to all listening and viewing public on the World Wide Web and on social media. We have just concluded 2 very successful, engaging and fulfilling days of discussions, presentations and conversations on the priorities of the Assembly. We look at 44 priority projects as well as the ongoing projects. We also looked at the global picture of the Tobago House of Assembly, seeing that we requested about $3.9 billion and disaggregated. That would be about $2.8 billion for recurrent expenditure, $1 billion for development program, $91.9 million for URP, and about $43 million for CPEP. And basically, we have received in Tobago about 20% of our development program, as well as European CPEP funding. And on the recurrent side, we received about somewhere around 85%. And with that being said, we decided we're going to maximize the value of these limited financial resources, come together and have discussions on how best we can maximize these resources using strategic selectivity, as the Chief Secretary did indicate. Firstly, I'd like to thank our administrators and the technical team for their inputs today, and their inputs also have been noted throughout my tenure here as Secretary of Finance, and that we intend to continue collaboration with all our stakeholders. As the Chief Secretary did indicate, we will be having a corporate networking event next Monday, as well as other collaborative and partnership initiatives with our stakeholders throughout Finance Month and beyond. This retreat, as I said, focused on our budget deficit, and we are now going to present to you, Tobago, what we intend to do with $2.608 billion, and disaggregated, that's about 2.375 for recurrent expenditure, 205 million for development program, 18 million for URP, and 9.2 for CPEP. We are going to utilize the strategic selectivity framework, and that is where we prioritize using specific criteria. And the criteria we use for the past 2 days are cost effectiveness. We looked at the economic landscape of Tobago, the social needs that Tobago currently face. We looked at the feasibility of these studies in terms of these projects in terms of the time frame and the ability and possibility of these projects being implemented and the sustainable development needs. Some of the other strategies we wish to employ are the upskilling of the workforce. We currently have skilled, semi-skilled, and unskilled workforce in Tobago. And we have decided, are we going to utilize this workforce to do some projects in-house and try to reduce the expenditure in terms of restrict expenditure to fiscal 2023 levels. In fiscal 2023, the Tobago House of Assembly spent under recurrent expenditure $2.083 billion, and that is the cap upon which we're going to use for each division, well, across the Assembly. Each division will have a different percentage of cut because it's based on their 2023 levels. So for instance, the division of, I think, infrastructure is only about a 9% cut, if I could remember. I don't have the figures in front of me, but we went through and disaggregated each division's level of expenditure today. We are going to also look at cutting expenditure in various line items, such as minor equipment, official overseas travel, promotions, promotion of activities and or events under materials and supplies, office stationery and supplies. And we would try to ensure that our procurement arrangements redound to the benefit of us maximizing on economies of scale and negotiating prices with our service providers. The overall strategy basically is to restrict expenditure to 2023 levels, and that would save us about $292 million. And it really means that we have to sacrifice some things on the recurrent side, and I want to be able to understand this sacrifice would mean that we cannot do certain things on the recurrent side in order to bolster and accelerate Tobago's development program and unlock our development potential. I will now go to CPEP and URP, having only received 20% of what we requested in June, and CPEP and URP is usually supplemented from the unspent balances from the previous year. So far, we have determined that unspent balances is about $100 million, about 23 million. So therefore, from the unspent balances, we will be allocating 83 million to those projects to ensure that these vulnerable groups, and URP and CPF have been doing fantastic work, especially on the development side. So we're going to take that and invest it into these groups of workers. As the Chief Secretary did indicate, we looked at 44 projects, and these projects are by line items. But when I'm completed here, you may count it and say, well, those were not 44. And that is because some of them would be grouped. So for instance, that meant distribution of land in certain areas under settlements, and I will get to that in a bit. The first program that the THA has on its priority agenda, and it is not in order of priority but in order of numerical order, is the loan guarantee program, the collateral for the SME sector. The loan guarantee program, we are looking at to start with about $12 million. The fund, we will fund it to about 25, but in the short term, and because we are now starting the program, we are going to look at $10 million to start and about $2 million for the administrative costs of that program. Under the Division of Finance as well, we will be intensifying and boosting the provision of financing and support to the micro, small, medium enterprises and the small and medium enterprises under the loan and grant program, with particular focus on agriculture, farming, fishing, and tourism. One of the things that the Chief Secretary did indicate to me that, you know, it's really important, particularly for the fishing sector, is those GPS tracking systems for the fishermen and their boats, because we are seeing a high incidence of boats going missing. So this grant program will provide for equipment for fisher folk and fishermen. As I did indicate, it will also encourage for job creation, encouraging local entrepreneurship, and expanding opportunities for exportation for our local entrepreneurs. Under the Division of Tourism, we have already started the Fort King George restoration project, which involves the lighthouse, where we will be replacing the light on the lighthouse and doing some restorative works around that area at the Fort King George. And at some point in time later on, we will be monetizing that facility. Secondly, the Store Bay Beach Facility, and this is another one under tourism. We had consultation yesterday on the revised redesign for the Store Bay Beach Facility. Under tourism, we have another project called the Scarborough Beautification Project, and we will be concentrating on that new stretch of the Calypso Rose Boulevard. We'll be doing a lot of branding, putting alongside benches, and restoring that area for, that's the primary focus, branding, restoring that area on the boulevard. I think one of the things that the Chief Secretary did indicate is to put a nice walk of fame for those persons and heroes of culture in Tobago. Another one of the projects under the Division of Tourism is the restorative and enhancement works at the Swallows area. So we are looking at the Swallows area. As you have known, we have, I don't want to say removed, but we have removed some of those vendors in order to restore the area, to give them vending booths that are fit for purpose and that has nice aesthetics for that area in Swallows. Also, we want to do some works at the No Man's Land facility, installing washroom facilities and proper vending stalls for that area. There's also a vending plaza just before the Pigeon Point entrance and we would want to restore and rehabilitate that building as well. The home for the Blue Food facility in Lansome, Bloody Bay, Lansome. That is another priority project where we'll be enhancing that area, and the Chief Secretary and the Secretary of Tourism would be able to give additional several areas across Tobago, and these include Indian Walk, Corland, Kendall, Louis D'Or, Hope Farm, and Goldsboro. There would also be a shade house project in Hope Farm, we also have the Agriculture Access Road Program, which is an ongoing project for us, and we have also put that one on the table as one of our priority projects. Moving on to the Division of Education, we will begin the construction of the Corland ECC, which have already started in terms of design works. Also, the construction of the Scarborough Sec, we'll talk about commence the preparation of the land. We have already done the tender for the designs, so now it's really the assessment phase, and we will continue that conversation and also be in conversation with the central government, particularly at the mid-year, for funding for this project, because the Minister of Finance did indicate that he will fund. The Division of Education is the Department of Advanced Training and Advisory Services, and that's where we provide bursary and assistance for tertiary level education. And I would like to let Tobago know that we will look at specialized scholarships in the area of tourism and areas of public sector, particularly procurement. We have the new procurement legislation which requires procurement professionals in this space. We find we have a dearth of procurement professionals, and therefore we will have a scholarship program that will encourage persons to study in these areas and provide support, technical and financial support for these areas. Under the community development, youth development, and sport, one of those top priority areas or projects is the Charlottesville Multipurpose Facility and Pavilion, which is in dire need of restorative and rehabilitative works. The Goodwood Pavilion, and this is another project that we will be pursuing in this year, and it has really taken us a long time because of the handover process after UDICOT terminated their services for the completion of these facilities. So we will be completing the Goodwood Pavilion. The Corlan Sporting Arena, we also have a few works to be done. After the first phase, we'll start the second phase with some washroom facilities, and there's a bank, the infrastructure was on the banking area. Is it banking or the landscaping at the bank?
Embankment, yeah.
Embankment. The embankment of that area, as well as, there's one more thing, is the washroom, the embankment. But
Lights.
we are doing, and the lighting. The Shore Park Hard Courts is another project that we have on the table as priority, because the entire hard court facility is very important for us, and we have external stakeholders who are looking at the area to have sporting activities take place at the hard court. So we're going to restore the entire hard court area at Shore Park. We will commence a youth residential learning and training program, which is a hybrid of the MyLat and MyPath initiative, and the Chief Secretary and the Secretary of Community Development will elaborate on this program or initiative. Under the Division of Infrastructure, the construction of a new licensing facility in Goldsboro, and this will attract works in terms of inspection facilities at that new facility that will be monetized, where persons can go to that facility and have their vehicles inspected. And we'll look at this facility as one of the main facilities for fleet maintenance, particularly for the public sector fleet, the fleet that we have in the Tobago House of Assembly, and it's also open to the public. The Southwest Tobago drainage upgrade within that area from the Bonaccord Canaan traffic lights go right down past Milford Court, going down to the Four Roads area. It's in dire need of some works to assist in that and alleviate that drainage and flooding issue that we have been having, and that has attracted the attention of the Division of Infrastructure, and that work will be pursued in this fiscal period. We will be doing some upgrade works in this, at the Sanctus Hill Road, particularly to reduce the risk of any accidents or potential fatalities for those children we find crossing the highway to get to that Pentecostal Light and Life school. So there will be an entire redevelopment from the Sanctus Hill area coming right over to Smithfield, and that will alleviate traffic, as well as it will be a safer arrangement for students attending the Pentecostal Light and Life school. Moving on to public health, or the Division of Health, Wellness and Social Protection, there needs to be some work at that public health facility at Signal Hill, and we'll be doing a lot of restorative works at that facility. The digitization of social protection. Soon, the vulnerable and anyone who would like to access facilities at the Division of Health, particularly for grant funding and any assistance, can now access these online through the digitization project. Persons will no longer have to go to the division and sign a form and be back and forth, but can now access these services online. This project may be at no cost to the Division of Health. We are still finalizing some arrangements with some international bodies and some national bodies as well, where funding will be allocated, not in the THA, but by other stakeholders. Tobago Cardiac Care Program, in partnership with Johns Hopkins, is another project that would be undertaken by the Division of Health, Wellness and Social Protection. And this is in light of the high incidence of heart-related diseases in Tobago as one of the top 3 diseases that takes lives on the island of Tobago. So we will be collaborating with the Johns Hopkins Institute or University to provide that technical assistance, medical assistance. There will be exchanges between persons in Tobago and persons coming from Johns Hopkins to give that kind of support to Tobago. The Division of Health intends to acquire 8 more ambulances. We have 4 ambulances that are currently being rebranded. I think it's licensed and branded and registered. And we will be purchasing 8 more ambulances in Tobago.
We already paid the down payment.
And the Chief Secretary has indicated that we have already done the down payment on these 8, so we have 4 on the way that should be dispersed to the Assembly within the next month or so, and we are going to acquire 8 more ambulances for Tobago. Currently we only own 2, and I think we lease about 6, and they are not working at the optimal level, so we are right now going to aggressively pursue 8 more ambulances to bring the total fleet in Tobago to 12. With a geographical space and the demography of Tobago that we currently have, the optimal they did indicate was 10, but we will take it up to 12 so that we can take care of any emergencies that we have in Tobago at best and efficiently. We will be acquiring MRI and CT scanners at the TRHA. We'll also be pursuing a baby box initiative, and that baby box initiative is really for newborn babies as well as the mothers who will be at the hospital once a baby is birthed at the hospital. All mothers that gave birth to babies in Tobago, it could be single birth, multiple births, will have access to a baby box with essential supplies for both baby and mother. We have estimated the baby box to about 600 in this year. The birth rate right now is about 400. I think it has dropped significantly, but this may be an encouragement, an incentive to have babies in Tobago with the baby box initiative. Moving on to settlements, we have the affordable housing project. We'll start with that one. The construction of low-cost houses. I think we have one already in Tobago in Milford Court, and we will just increase the numbers. We are still working out, we have an estimated cost, but we are still working out if we're going to do 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom and how many we will do based on the applications and the needs of persons in Tobago. But these houses will be constructed in this fiscal period. As I did indicate before, land distribution in the areas of Castara, Adelphi, and Blemin. The Tobago House of Assembly will be developing lands. In Castara, there are about 37 parcels that will be developed and distributed. Adelphi, about 50 parcels, and in Blemin, about 15 parcels. We will also be looking at the construction of units in Adventia and doing some works at the Courland area in terms of the sewer system and the lift station. We are also pursuing PPP arrangements for the Rise Land development so that the THA will not have the financial burden of these development works. Public officers in Tobago. We have a new program called the Public Officers Subsidized Housing Program, and it's a housing program that is separate and apart from what the settlements offer to the Tobago public. But this one is really tasked for public officers in Tobago, and the Chief Secretary will give additional details, but the lands have already been identified for this project across Tobago. Another very important project or discussion that we are having is the Tobago autonomy, and we have prioritized, we have projectized this this discussion right now, and we have the Tobago Autonomy Project, where we would be sensitizing, educating, and preparing Tobago for the autonomy transition for Tobago. And therefore, this is another project under the Office of the Chief Secretary, upon which the Chief Secretary will elaborate and give more details on this project. But this is a priority, another priority project for Tobago. And finally, the Culloden playing field. We have closed the deal on that Culloden land that we paid about $1.9 million in 2009. We have since closed that deal, and we paid off for that entire 146 acres of land, and this is great news for the community of Culloden. One of the first things we'd like to do in that area that may not be too costly for us and may be very feasible and easy for us to do right now is the Culloden playing field. So the Culloden playing field will be developed. We will develop the land. We may not be able to right now do bleachers and pavilion, but we will develop that land in the first instance, in the first phase, for a playing field. Those are it wasn't all of our priority projects, but those are the major priorities. We have a few more on the table, but I have just laid for you the top priority projects of the Tobago House of Assembly. These priority projects will be supplemented, the cost will be supplemented from the recurrent expenditure. As I did indicate, we will restrict to fiscal 2023 levels, and that will redound to savings of about $292 million. Included in that 292, though, is the funding that we will reserve for unspent balances to fund CPEP and URP in fiscal 2026. We have, as I did indicate, we have other cost-cutting and cost-saving measures that we will employ. As a matter of fact, as Secretary of Finance, I did not instruct the divisions, secretaries, and administrators came with their cost-cutting initiatives that they will employ in their divisions. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts, for sharing those priority projects in your virtual hand. Do we have any questions from members of the media logged in? Candace Jackson. Good afternoon, Candace.
Hi, good afternoon. Good afternoon, are you hearing me?
Yes, we're hearing you. You can go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you. So first of all, could I get an idea of the total amount of unspent balances that were recorded from the last fiscal year, as well as, I know you mentioned some upgrades that was going to happen to the Calypso Rose Boulevard. I'm not too sure if the administration is aware, but there is a monument in Lambo that was dedicated to both Calypso Rose and Lord Kitchener that is being left to the elements right now. Is there any plans to include that in those upgrades? And finally, with COP29 happening right now in Azerbaijan, what's the THA's position on the discussions that are happening there right now? And does Tobago have a voice in those discussions?
All right, so the last two questions or so, Ms. Chambers, you might have to help us in reminding us of those two.
Candace, just clearly repeat the last two questions, please.
Hello, are you hearing me now?
Yes.
All right. So the last two questions were, there is a monument in Lambo that is dedicated to Lord Kitchener and Calypso Rose that is being left to the elements. Is that going to upgrade? So that's going to be included with the upgrades that you mentioned that is going to be happening to the newly minted Calypso Rose Boulevard and those upgrades that you mentioned earlier, as well as with COP29 happening right now in Azerbaijan, what's the THA's position on those discussions, and does Tobago itself have a voice where that's concerned?
All right. So let me deal with the simpler ones. COP29, in terms of a THA voice, the THA wasn't invited to send anyone to the contingent that represented Trinidad and Tobago. I am not sure what that contingent looks like. I know normally Minister Beckers will be the one to lead that contingent if the Prime Minister is not leading it. But Tobago is not fully in that conversation. The second to last question concerning monuments in Lambo, those were all privately placed there by Palm Villas, I believe, and they removed them themselves. So those weren't THA monuments or THA artifacts placed there. They were placed there by a private enterprise, and they have removed them themselves. I can't say whether they removed them for fixing or cleaning or what have you, but those weren't placed there by the Tobago House of Assembly. Your question about unspent, and the Secretary will answer that, but I want to caution, so you don't go away thinking that unspent balances mean monies that the Tobago House of Assembly could not spend. That is just the name of the account, or the name of the how to put it, the place where we hold the money. What is actually happening is that every single fiscal year, because we have practically very standard allocations for European CPEP, and when we add European CPEP together, they are almost half of what the development allocation is. But given we have very standard allocation, the Tobago House of Assembly is forced into a position where it must deliberately not spend some of its monies to be able to pay wages for CPEP and URP in the following fiscal year. If we don't do that, then CPEP and URP CPEP over $20 million in wages. And so we have to be very deliberate at the very start of the fiscal and decide, look, these amounts, we are just not going to spend it. We are just going to leave it and allow it to go into the unspent balances, so that in the new fiscal we can extract them and be able to take care of the CPEP and URP workers. So I don't want you to go away with the idea that unspent balances mean the THA does not have the capacity to spend or capacity to utilize the resource. But it's a case of us deliberately not spending to allow that there be monies in the kitty, so to speak, to take care of those workers who are at the lower or among the lowest paid within the Tobago space. If we don't do that, then we will perhaps never get the allocation from the central government to be able to take care of that. And the Secretary will tell you what the standard allocation is and how much we do in fact pay to CPF and URP, and how much we are deciding right now at the start of the fiscal that we are going to leave and not spend to allow us contingency fund. Why, before we got any monies from central government to deal with oil spill, we could have gone and taken out $15 million to begin to pay service providers. And that contingency fund is what we set aside and save if we have hurricanes and all of those things, natural disasters. So I want us to understand what unspent means. That is not a case where the THA does not have the capacity, and because we don't have the capacity, unspent is left. That's just what it is called, unspent, meaning money is not spent. That's what it means literally. And it's a case of us deliberately not spending all of our allocation to take care of some of these needs that include CPEP, URP, contingency, funding, and so on. So Secretary will give us some more data in terms of the numbers.
So, based on your question, the unspent balances from fiscal 2024 was about $120 million, but I funding according to the law. And I'll tell you, we receive a check from central government on the last day of the year. Let me tell you what that means. Reporting the check, so the check goes to the Director of Finance. She has to report and log it in a registry. it has to go to the bank, it has to be clear before we can spend it. So that last check we receive on the last day of the fiscal year, which can be the 30th of September, that also forms part of the unspent. And it may be very impractical to spend that. So I don't want you all to think the notion that we receive all this $2.5 billion and we just don't spend it. Part of the problem is the practicality of spending when we receive monies anytime. As a matter of fact, I can't tell you as Secretary of Finance when I'm going to receive a release for December. We have received a check on October 17th to take care of October and November, and I don't know when. I cannot tell you with a degree of predictability when I receive December. On September every year, the last working day, we receive a check from the central government. And that is basically because of the offsetting arrangement. So sometimes that amount forms part of the unspent balances because we are just unable to spend it because it's impractical to spend. So at this point in time, as the Chief Secretary did indicate, we deliberately do not release funding so that we can take care of the expenditure relating to CPEP and URP. I just indicated that CPEP and URP only received 20% of what we asked for in our budgetary request for fiscal 2025.
Thank you, Candace, for your questions. I'm seeing we have another virtual hand raised. Elizabeth Williams. Good afternoon, Elizabeth.
Good afternoon. Hope you are hearing me. Good afternoon, Mr. Chief Secretary, and also the Finance Secretary. What I wanted to know, I just had two things in terms of from the education system. I wanted to know if, in terms of priority, if it's being looked at in terms of contract teachers. We spoke to tutor today, and tutor raised some concerns with respect to the issue of contract teachers, and also some persons also contacted us at TV6 with respect to a number of cleaners attached to the Division of Education who have not been paid since October. I don't know if you could also look into that.
All right, so the second one is the first time I'm hearing that. And the administrator who is in the room is indicating that the cleaners got paid up to today. So I'm not sure about them not being paid. I'm not sure what the issue with the contracted teachers are at the moment, exactly precisely what is the issue. But I am aware that, because I was one of them, that the Tobago House of Assembly has a cadre of contracted teachers that are called educators who operate within the system. They receive their salaries, as far as I know, on time every single month, and we have been doing a better job than all previous made for this fiscal. Will be in the region of about 10.5 million or so. The allocation is actually about 9.5 million. So the actual allocation from the central government to pay gratuities is less than what we are calculating we'll need to pay for gratuities in this fiscal. Certainly we will pay the 9.5 million, and then we will see what might be possible beyond that. But it's not very clear what precisely is the issue with the contracted teachers, but we can confirm that all officers within the Division of Education have in fact been paid, and we continue to prioritize our educators, and that's why you will see the Tobago House of Assembly, for example, in the last fiscal, we spent the same amount as the Ministry of Education on school repairs. If you think of Trinidad and the hundreds of schools they have, and they only spent 20 million, and look at Tobago and the fact that we have far less schools and we also spent the same 20 million, that should tell you that per capita, per geography, per number of schools, that the Tobago House of Assembly and this administration I lead continues to prioritize education to the extent that we spend more per child, per school, per district in education than any other part of the country. I could even go further and say to you that when we look at the primary school system, we have a ratio of about 15 pupils to one teacher. And when we go to the secondary school system, the ratio is about 11 students per one teacher based on the numbers we have. And I guarantee you that per capita ratio does not exist anywhere else in the country and might be the best in terms of distribution of teacher to student resource anywhere in the Caribbean region. Another testament of the fact that we continue to prioritize education at great costs on the taxpayer, but we understand and we appreciate that we have to make those investments. $1 million on school feeding just for our students, again going way above the allocation just to ensure that we prioritize education needs. And you learned earlier this year when the C results came out that Tobago have moved up in the ranking. In fact, since we start collecting data on SCA exam results, last year was the highest Tobago has ever placed on the ranking among educational districts. The top 6, top 5, preferably that will position Tobago and Tobago students in a much more advantageous position. So, long story short, we continue to prioritize education, and the list we get to the 28th in the House, all 44 will be clearly listed for you, costs attached to all 44, and the activities that will take place for their execution. And that's in addition to some ongoing above the others as our priority. And we are also saying that with a budgetary allocation of just about 200 million and us cutting back on the current side and moving those monies towards development, that we can't as an assembly realistically do the 300 and something plus development projects that have been on the books. Some have been on the books for much longer than I was a politician. Some have been on the books since I was a student in high school. And so we have to streamline the thing. And why 44? We are approaching the 44th year of the THA on.
I'm seeing Elizabeth's hand is raised again. So Elizabeth, you can go ahead and pose your question.
Mr. Chief Secretary,
Sure.
It was relating to the contract teachers, because I know you were a contract teacher before the elections, but what Mr. Braden Roberts is speaking to is that the contract teachers, they are not, in terms of not being in service, if you understand what I mean.
So
they
are they're not being in?
In terms of the contract teachers, they are still not afforded certain privileges that teachers who are in service would receive. I don't know if you understand exactly what I mean.
I understand what you're getting at. So normally, with contract employment, you tend to operate within the four boundaries, the four walls of your contract. We have been revisiting that to allow for certain privileges, and I'll give you an example of one. It is not ordinary or normal that contracted teachers, for example, will be afforded the opportunity for study leave or to get time off to go and study within a contract. That is normally attached to those on the establishment or those public service teachers, so to speak, those who are established teachers. And that's one of the areas that we have started relaxing and change in terms of contracts to allow for that to happen. Those established teachers received an increase in salary recently, and the division has been looking at what we can do for the upcoming contracts, because contracts have a definite period. It might be 2 years, 3 years. So we are looking at what we can do when those contracts come up for renewal in terms of bringing those contracted teachers much more in line with the counterparts on the establishment as well. So we have been looking at ways to improve the lives and the livelihoods of our contracted teachers. The challenge, however, is that the Tobago House of Assembly does not have control over the Teaching Service Commission. We do not have control over the Teaching Service Commission. We do not have control over the CPO and also over the cabinet. And we do not have control over the establishment. So, for example, the Tobago House of Assembly does not determine the number of teachers on the establishment at any particular school. So we don't come and say, well, okay, Palatavere, you have an establishment of 5 or 6. The THA does not have that authority. And so the THA simply have to augment the structure with contracted teachers. We will love, for example, that in some of our secondary schools in particular, that the establishments are redone to suit the current needs, because in some instances the establishment was last done donkey years ago. Again, the Tobago House of Assembly does not have control over that system, and I'm sure Mr. Roberts is aware of that. So we could only work within the confines of the THA Act, the law, the regulations, and so where we cannot put people on the establishment and move them off of contracts and move them on the establishment, we are forced to keep them on contracts and just ensure that we continuously have the contracts evolve to a place where the teachers and the educators are much more comfortable, and work assiduously to ensure that gratuities are paid at the end of a contractual term.
Candice Jackson.
Hi, good afternoon again. Chief Secretary or perhaps Secretary Roberts, I don't know if you'll be able to answer. Have you been able to get a response from the Ministry of Finance as to what's happening with the insurance payout for Hurricane Beryl? Because I know some of the residents who were affected are still facing some issues and they're still facing some concerns, and they are wondering, when they would see some relief. So if you have any update on what's been happening with that insurance payout that was given by CRIF to Tobago, as well as is the THA's expenditure affected in any way by the forex shortages that we are experiencing at the moment? And if you are, could you explain a little bit about how you all are affected?
I think I might prefer the Secretary of Finance answer this question, because I can't trust myself to be polite in my response. So your conversations with the Minister of Finance about CRIF, and I will extend the question for you, Ms. Jackson, to also look at the fact that the country is expecting also insurance type payouts with regards to the oil spill. I know recently the Minister of Energy was in the UK at ITOF, and again the THA is just not included in those conversations, but I'll ask the Secretary of Finance to respond as to whether or not the Tobago House of Assembly received any of those insurance monies, any of those grants given for either burial or oil spill, and what was the Minister of Finance's position on Tobago receiving monies from these things, so that we could then pass the benefit on to those who were affected.
Thank you, Candice, for that question. So, as I would have escalated in the public space that I had two, as well as the oil spill, the Minister of Finance did ask me to write. I wrote to him on both occasions. As soon as we were completed the second meeting in September, I did write to him in September, and I received no response. Today, though, in my presentation, I did indicate one of our options for additional funding are those outside monies for us. I did indicate that I will be pursuing the monies outstanding for the oil spill and for the CRIF. Princess in Tobago and Trinidad has refused to provide any kind of response as done. That's the kind of posture we had for the oil spill at short notice, and in cases of emergency. As Secretary of Finance, I really don't know what we will do in light of the fact that we utilize all our contingency funding for the first payments to the contractors who did the cleanup. Right, I sent, attached to the letter, I sent the request from the THA in terms of our damages, and I also sent the report from CRIF indicating that Tobago was entitled to a payout of 372,000 US dollars.
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions from members of the media? I'm not seeing any more raised hands virtually. So on that note, that's how we'll end this afternoon's press conference. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Thank you, Chief Secretary, Honorable Augustine, and the Secretary of Finance, Trade and the Economy, Councillor Petal and Roberts, for the information which you shared. Thank you, members of the media, for your questions as well. I'm Davia Chambers saying please stay safe, stay well, and have a great afternoon.
But we don't maintain our same positions there, right? Let me just. Well, I can.